All right, John chapter 5, please. John. Beginning at verse 1. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, which is called in Hebrew Bethesda, having 5 porches. In these lay a great multitude of sick people, blind, lame, paralyzed, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain time into the pool and stirred up the water. And then whoever stepped in first after the stirring of the water was made well of whatever disease he had. Now a certain man was there who had an infirmity 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he already had been in that condition a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, but while I am coming, another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, Rise, take up your bed and walk. And immediately the man was made well, took up his bed and walked. And that day was the Sabbath. The Jews therefore said to him, who was cured, "It is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to carry your bed." He answered them, "He who made me well said to me, 'Take up your bed and walk.'" Then they asked him, "Who is the man who said to you, 'Take up your bed and walk'?" But the one who was healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, a multitude being in that place. Afterward Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you have been made well. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you." The man departed and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. For this reason the Jews persecuted Jesus and sought to kill him, because he had done these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, "My Father has been working until now, and I have been working." Therefore the Jews sought all the more to kill him, because he not only broke the Sabbath, but he also said that God was his Father, making himself equal with God. Father, thank you for this word. Thank you that you are so beautiful and so filled with mercy and love and grace, that you would come here and face these men who would question you to your face, who would accuse you of breaking their rules when they've yet to keep a single one of yours. The irony is overwhelming, Lord. And you could have just wiped. I'm really glad that you suffer fools. You are a beautiful and merciful God. Lord, clear this place of any evil that's found its way in, and let this place be completely and utterly filled with your Spirit. Speak to each one of us tonight through your word. And all of this we ask in the blessed and holy name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
God suffers fools, doesn't he?
Amen.
I'm really grateful for that, because I'm chief amongst them.
No, I don't think so.
I think we take turns.
Yes. Title we all share.
All right.
So last week we saw Jesus in the calling of Matthew. His whole ministry, his whole life is entering kind of a new phase. Things are changing. He's entering a period of direct confrontation with the Pharisees and scribes, where before they had seen him as just a oddity and a curiosity, and they didn't really know how to deal with them. Now it's going to turn into just outright open hostility. When last we saw Jesus, the Pharisees had thrown a baited question towards him. What are you doing eating with all these dirty people? Implying that he was breaking the law by associating with sinners and those who are unclean. This week, we're going to look at a sign, John's word for a miracle. Actually, this is the third of 7 signs, 7 major signs that John points out in his gospel. Sign being a signpost or a pointing to the divinity of Jesus. And this sign is going to lead to a confrontation with the religious elite over his authority and his identity. And we're not going to get to it this week, but when next we gather, this is an incredibly long and detailed discourse. I hit just a little of it at the end there, where Jesus really makes it clear exactly who he is. But there's also another element to this. What Jesus said last week to the Pharisees could just as easily apply this week. He said, go and learn what this means. I desire mercy rather than sacrifice. And if you can't see that spoken over this story, the same as he had spoken it over the events at Matthew's house. And I have a feeling that's going to be a reoccurring theme as we go through this, that almost everything you see the Pharisees and scribes doing, you could speak over it. I desire mercy rather than sacrifice. Beginning with verse 1, after this there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. So we have an indeterminate period of time between the calling of Matthew. He did have to get all the way up from Capernaum to Jerusalem. There's not a real clear period, real clear indication as to what period of time has elapsed here. And it's a feast. I spent a lot of time going over this, trying to, the only thing I can come up with, the only thing that's really clear, although there is some disagreement, is it's most likely not Passover. There are 3 feasts of the Jews where the Jews are required to show up in Jerusalem for the feast: Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. This feast is large enough to be one of those 3. Why is it not Passover? We know that Jesus' ministry lasted roughly 3.5 years. There were 3 Passovers during that time. John actually calls 3 of the feasts Passover, so this would make a 4th, and that would completely throw the timeline off. One of the Passovers that John mentions is in chapter 6, so right after this. So if you look at the timeline, this is most likely Feast of Tabernacles. Feast of Booths. And then I was just reading, somebody came up with a completely new name for it. Feast of CSB Bible, or the Baker Bible, called it something completely different. Feast. It was another name for tents or wigwams or something. But they came up with a completely different name for it. So in verse 2, now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, which is called in Hebrew Bethesda, having 5 porches. Now if you can picture in your mind, temple faces east, so temple is here. Got the 4 walls of the complex facing east. So up in the north corner is Antonia Fortress, which is what the Romans built there so that they could look and peek down into and see what those rabble-rousing Jews were up to. And kind of right there, kitty corner off of Antonia Fortress, and just next to the wall, right next to Antonia Fortress was the sheep gates. On the very northern wall of the temple complex, you have the sheep gate, which is where they brought in the sheep for the sacrifice. It's not a clever naming scheme, it's just what it is. But right there, Antonia Fortress, the walls of the temple complex, sat the pool of Bethesda. If you're looking east, the Mount of Olives would have been over here. Down at the bottom of the Mount of Olives, Kidron Valley, Garden of Gethsemane. So roughly, straight out east from the pool of Bethesda would be the Garden of Gethsemane, just to kind of orient it all in your mind. I'm not drawing any lines there, it's just kind of orienting everything for you. Bethesda in Hebrew means house of mercy. And it's actually,
Used a lot for church names.
what?
I said that explains why it's used a lot
It's
for
a really good name
church
for a
names.
church, absolutely.
Hospitals.
So it's actually a complex of 2 pools. They call it one pool. 5 porches. So there's an upper pool and a lower pool. Wall here, wall on each end. And then a 5th row of actually columns with a roof, patio, portico that bisects the 2 pools. So it's a rather large complex with a lot of seating room. They found this. It actually exists. It had 5 porches. And it's really neat. You go there and there's all these stone walls and it's the Byzantines, the Romans that went Christian had it for a while, and just like the Catholics do today, they find a spot and they build a church over it, and then that church gets torn down. But it's just this, it's the epitome of what a ruin would look like in your mind. And you can walk all the way around it and then actually go down into it. There's stairs on either side, and you can go down into it, and there's this big archway and these beautiful, beautiful red poppies grow out of the walls. They're just gorgeous, and when you smush them in your Bible, they kind of turn purple, but they're red at the time.
They're super red.
Super red, and they're all over the place, and it's just this really beautiful place. And kind of, I'll get to that. It's one of my favorite places to go over there. It's so obvious what it used to be in the location, and it orients so many other things for you. And after the Byzantines got run off, the Catholics, I want to say in the 30s or 40s, built St. Anne's Church. And Anne is the mother of, or I don't know how they figured that out. Anne was the mother of Mary, the mother of Jesus, and so she's a saint now. But the inside of the church is just gorgeous. These beautiful white marble statues of Anne and Mary. And the dome is just perfectly sculpted. And to go in there and hear people sing.
You have to sing when you go in.
You have to. It's just a thing. You just get in the middle and everybody sings. And unfortunately, if you have a bad voice, it amplifies that too. So, but it's an amazing experience, and highly recommend it. But it is real. We do know it's there. There's proof, and we'll get a little deeper into that in a minute. Verses 3 and 4. In these lay a great multitude of sick people, blind, lame, paralyzed, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain time into the pool and stirred up the water. Then whoever stepped in first, after the stirring of the water, was made well of whatever disease he had. So this place is literally just overrun with sick people. And I imagine it's a whole lot more than sick people, because I was a lame guy, a blind guy, or a paralyzed guy going to get from the edge of the water into the water for any reason whatsoever. So you've got all of the sick people and all of their helpers, family members, friends. We saw a guy 2 weeks ago that had 4 good friends, and they knew to take him to Jesus. But these guys don't seem to know that. It's just a mega mass of humanity filling these porches all the way around these pool. From what I read in the commentators and what I've been able to dig up, is this wasn't a year-round thing. It was during the festivals. So this guy hadn't been laying there for 38 years. In fact, it says he was infirm for 38 years. He wasn't laying there for 38 years. It was something special that they thought happened during the festivals. And frankly, I really don't think this was real. I don't think anybody really got healed. And when I get a little into the origins of where this comes from, I think you'll understand. And I'm not saying that God cannot or does not do some really crazy healings. I mean, he does. Elijah just laid on a kid and he came back to life. Or was it Elisha? I'm sorry, I screwed that up. And Naaman had to dip in muddy water 7 times and he was healed. And I'm not saying God doesn't do some really crazy stuff, but I don't think this in any way fits with God's character. To have a bunch of people climbing over each other to get into a pool of water because and only one person gets healed, and it's when he ever capriciously goes down. This is the kind of thing that people complain about God about.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So my biggest complaint against this is it just doesn't fit with God's character. So where does this come from? And I do believe actually the text supports that these are not real healings, and I'll point that out when we get to it. So why did they think that? As archaeologists have explored both the caves in the immediate area around this, as well as digging down into the areas surrounding this, and I heard this from the guides when I was there, they've dug down to the period when the city was occupied by the Jebusites, which were the Canaanite people that occupied the area before the Jews took it over. And they worshipped a pagan god of healing at this site. I believe this myth just carried over into the days when the Jews occupied it. It's believed that these pools were fed by an intermittent, gurgling kind of spring, not a steady running, flowing spring, but the pressure in the earth would build up and it would just burp out some water and things would stir around. And there it is, let's climb over somebody to be the first in line to get in there. And Jesus comes here for a purpose, and I'll point that out again a little later. Verse 5. Now a certain man was there who had an infirmity 38 years. Again, not that he was lying there at this place for 38 years, but he had his infirmity for 38 years. Just coincidentally, it was 38 years that the children of Israel wandered through the wilderness. They were in the desert for 40 years, but 2 of those were actually planned. 38, not so much. There's a correlation here. Verse 6, when Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he already had been in that condition a long time, he said to him, do you want to be made well? There's really no possible way Jesus could have just looked at this guy and known that he'd been there for 38 years or that he'd been. This is divine knowledge. God's in charge of this. God is putting this whole thing together, and it's for very specific purposes. But then Jesus asks the $1 million question. Do you want to be made well? wonder. No, I don't wonder. I actually just know that God's asking this question to a lot of people. And believe it or not, the answer is no. There are a lot of people walking around today that don't come to Jesus, that don't get saved because they don't want to be made well. They are just quite content with what's going on. Whether they're afraid of what the future holds or just what they're in has gotten so comfortable. That God has to ask, do you want to be made well? Not getting too far into the deep end, but that's actually when people are dealing with people who are possessed or people, they actually have to ask that question. And there are many times that person says, no, I couldn't possibly understand life without this. It's been a part of me so who will I be without this? And it's the same with sin. Who will I be if I give up this thing that I'm holding on to? I know I'm going to have to. I know what I'm doing isn't right. I know this isn't good for me. And yet, they hold on to it because they just don't want to change. And it's crazy that Jesus would have to ask this question, but he does. And the argument could be made that the guy actually never says he wants to be made well. Verse 7, the sick man answered him, Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. But while I am coming, another steps down before me. It's not really an answer to Jesus' question. This guy is so completely stuck on what's in front of him. He can't even hear God asking him this question. He's so caught up in the material world and what he's been doing. Who knows how many years? He's been infirm for 38 years. How many years family or friends have been bringing him and dumping him? And that's what they're doing because he doesn't have anybody to help him. He's alone. Or maybe he's not, totally infirm. He's one of those guys you see on a walker that just moves at like 3.2 miles per hour down the road, and it can get you some, but not very fast. And if the pool's burping and you got to get in, there's just maybe he's not completely disabled or paralyzed, and I've been thinking about this. I've been wanting this forever, and nobody's helping me, and I can't get in. And he actually doesn't hear what Jesus is asking him. He really thinks that the only way I'm going to get better, the only way I'm going to get healed is if I'm going to get in that pool. Somebody better help me. Jesus has other purposes in mind. So Jesus said to him, Rise, take up your bed and walk. And immediately the man was made well, took up his bed and walked. And that day was the Sabbath. We've seen Jesus do some healings up to this point. In particular, Peter's mother-in-law was, and Jesus directly rebuked the illness. Jesus directly dealt with what the sick person was dealing with. And here he almost doesn't even address that. It's like it doesn't exist. He just says, get up. And the power to carry out that command just comes with it. And in that has to be a lesson for all of us. If God gives us an order, the ability to carry it out is implied. God doesn't come to us and say, okay, now take this step and take that step, and I'm going to make sure you got enough money here, and I'm going to make sure that you don't get arrested when you get to the border, and then I'm going to get you into this camp, and then you're going to distribute all this stuff, and the spirit of me that is in you is just going to flow out and it's going to touch all these people. No, he says, I want you here. And every step it requires to get to that point is provided for. Because if he didn't want you to get there, he wouldn't have told you to get. So everything it takes to get there is already done. The question here, and I don't know that I'm going to have a really great answer, is why does Jesus heal this man? There's absolutely nothing about this man that says he should be healed. We're going to find out he doesn't even know who Jesus is. Jesus has to come up and introduce himself. So this is not a result of faith. This is not even a result of a request or an answer to an offer. Jesus has his own purposes here. And Jesus could have done this literally on any day of the week. Most of the festivals run 5, 7, 10 days, and he could have picked a day that wasn't the Sabbath. I'm sure the guy would have been there the next day, and I'm sure he was there the day before. And Jesus shows up on the Sabbath. If he'd have showed up on Sunday, a whole lot of trouble would have been avoided. If Jesus had showed up on Friday, things would have progressed a whole lot differently from here on out. I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but it almost seems like Jesus is trying to pick a fight.
Making a point.
Verse 10, the Jews therefore said to him who was cured, it is the Sabbath, it is not lawful for you to carry your bed. The Jews, remember, we're back in John. The Jews is John's general term for the ruling religious leaders who oppose Jesus. So we're not, every Jew said, we're straight back to the scribes and the Pharisees, priests. So what is he accused of? He's accused of violating the Sabbath. What exactly does the Bible spell out, just the Bible, spell out about the Sabbath? It's part of the Ten Commandments. We see it in Exodus 28 through 11. What?
You do no work on the Sabbath.
We'll get to that.
Well, it says to remember the Sabbath and to keep it holy.
Well, I was going to read it, and then we'll know for sure. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. So it's part of the Ten Commandments, right there in the middle. But its actual first mention of a Sabbath is in Exodus 16:23. The Jews are fleeing from Egypt, getting ready to flee, they have fled. They're heading out. God's providing manna from the sky. They wake up in the morning, they got food for the day. And God says, for 6 days, 6 days and 6 days only you gather. Now on any other day of the week, Monday through Thursday, Sunday through Thursday, if they pulled in more than, it would rot, it would go bad, it was no good. But on that 6th day, you gathered enough for 2 days, and the next day it was still good. So you do all your thing. It was all about showing that God would provide and take care of them. Now there are Sabbath days within the feast. Passover day is a holy Sabbath, no work. And then you got 7 more days of the Feast of No,
Online.
7-day Feast of Unleavened Bread, and then the last day. So you can do anything you want in the middle days, but the first day and the last day. So you've got Sabbaths there. Several of the other feasts have Sabbaths in the middle. Feast of Tabernacles, I believe, is Sabbath the whole 10 days. Whole 10 days, doing nothing, just laying out under the stars, looking up, eating sandwiches, and
So why did Jesus choose the man? Because he had a bed and would have had to pick it up if he did what Jesus said.
all right. I wasn't going to go there, but so there are some very specific commandments concerning. One of them is no cooking. Exodus 16:23. Then he said to them,
Alrighty, prayers.
"This is what I was going to get to that." Everybody, I'm just going to sit down. This is what the Lord has said. Tomorrow is a Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake today, and boil what you will boil, and lay up for yourselves all that remains to be kept until morning. So no cooking. Second thing we saw is that it's a perpetual covenant. In Exodus 31:16, therefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations as a perpetual covenant. So no cooking, and this goes on forever. This is not a till we get to some place or this week or for the next 35, permanent thing. As Miss Betty mentioned, kindle no fire. Exodus 35:3, you shall kindle no fire throughout your dwellings on the Sabbath day. There's another one that's implied because the guy picks up some sticks and he winds up subject to capital punishment for it. And so I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to pick up sticks, but I'm pretty sure that also goes back to kindling fire. Why was the guy picking up sticks? Because he's going to go home and kindle a fire. The point is, I will keep you warm on the Sabbath. I will feed you on the Sabbath. I am your Sabbath rest. You need nothing on the Sabbath. I'll take care of everything. And once a week, there's this supernatural provision provided by God that was meant to serve as an example to the whole rest of the world, because no one else in the world did this. No one took a day off. The other nations of the world, besides just thinking they were weird, they thought they were lazy too, because they took a day off of the week. This was a day you could go out and make more money, bring in more fish, plow more ground, and the Jews are just laying around the house, singing songs, going down to the temple. What we don't see in here is any command against what this man is doing. That's it. What I read you is all the Bible specifically says about what you can and can't do on the Sabbath. So this guy rolling up his little straw mat, throwing it over his shoulder, and going home, it's not in here. It's not in what God said. But there are very specific rules in the oral law of the Jews, the Mishnah. Within the Talmud, which includes the Mishnah, so this Talmud, the recording of all the oral interpretations of law. Within that are 6 volumes, 6 books just on how to keep the Sabbath. 6 books just on how to keep the Sabbath. If you got a false eye, you can't wear it because you're bearing a burden. If you've lost a leg, can't wear it because you're bearing a burden. If you get in an elevator, you can't hit the button. And they're constantly, because technology is changing, they're constantly having to add to this or take from this. But then there's this whole section within that 6 volumes of how to get around what they just told you have to do. You're only allowed to take a Sabbath day journey, and I think that was like a football field, 100 yards, unless you got a rope and tied it to the front door of your house and then strung it out to the end of the rope, 1,100 feet, 1,000 feet, whatever it was, and now you have a hallway of your house. So you can go another 1,000 feet past that. So if you get another rope and string it out. Or you can go the day before the Sabbath and go to some tree that's, 1,000 feet out or 1,000 yards and put something there, and now it's a temporary domicile, and you can travel from there to the temporary domicile, and then you got, the same distance outside of there. And they're accusing Jesus of breaking the Sabbath. I desire mercy rather than sacrifice. Verse 11, he answered them, he who made me well said to me, take up your bed and walk. Now, unlike many other people Jesus heals, he does not tell this guy, zip it. He does not tell him not to tell anybody that he was healed. But nonetheless, this guy's response seems very weaselish.
Is that a word?
It's the technical term, actually. Yes, weaselish. Is there a reason for him to be afraid? Technically, within the Old Testament laws, you could be stoned for breaking the Sabbath. But the Jews had lost the right to administer capital punishment many, many years before this. He's been a cripple for 38 years, being excommunicated from the church. I'm not sure how, but instead, he throws Jesus under the bus. Hey, that guy made me do it. That's really the feel you get from the way he answered. Hey, he told me to do it. Yeah, you know what? You are right. I didn't really want to, but the guy healed me, and I felt obligated to just, do what he said because, he healed me. It really seems like he's just maneuvering his way around because they're accusing him. Then they asked him, who is the man who said to you, take up your bed and walk? So who is the man who told you to break our laws, customs, and traditions? Who is it? In their eyes, the man who told him to sin, to break their laws and customs, actually would have had far more fault than the man who actually committed the sin. If you haven't picked up on yet, one of my favorite questions is what didn't they ask? What didn't they ask about? Why didn't somebody at some point go, hey, Matthias, what did he say? Did you say somebody made you well? Not a single person stopped to ask. What do you mean he made you well? What are you talking about? What's happening here? What did he make you well from? Where were you at? What's going on? Not a single person asked. The guy made me well. All they care about, it just flies over their heads. Or it seems to. But actually it really doesn't. We're going to see in verse 16, Jesus is accused of doing these things on the Sabbath. If all it had been was telling some guy to throw his mat over his shoulder, it had just been, but it's things. It's multiple. They heard it. They just don't care. They just don't care. We saw that with the disciples. Not one of them went, hey, what do you mean you're leaving us? Remember this story of man, what do you mean you're not going to, what do you mean they're going to take me? And it got me thinking as I'm looking at this, how often do we miss miracles because we are so wrapped up in our thing? Their thing was the law and law keeping and being righteous and looking good in front of the people and looking spiritual. How often do we miss God's miracles because we are so completely caught up in our thing? They say they serve God, but they don't actually know anything about Him, who He is or what He does. If they did, they'd know He's a God of miracles. He's a God of provision. He's a God of doing crazy miracles. He's a God of... If you're out wandering in the desert, wouldn't you expect if God was gonna feed it. He'd just, run in a bunch of cattle and there'd be basking. No, he drops this little black seed pod that no one's ever seen before on the ground, and it makes sweet, delicious bread. God does crazy, silly, don't take that the wrong way, does things that seem silly and outrageous to us all the time, and how much of it are we missing? Are we just overlooking because we're so completely caught up in our own thing? Are we really watching for all the miracles going on around us? Or does it have to look or happen in a particular way? And if it doesn't, do we just completely miss it? I think that's something I really need to pray about. To really ask God to give me eyes to see and ears to hear the miracles going on all around me.
Amen.
The things God's doing. Verse 13. But the one who was healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, a multitude being in that place. So Jesus heals the guy and just kind of fades into the woodwork. And this guy has no idea who Jesus was. As I pointed out, this healing is absolutely not any kind of response to the man's faith. But we also see that Jesus was not on a general healing mission because he had plenty of people to work with there. Jesus is reaching out. Jesus has healed one man for a very specific reason. And also notice that this is John's commentary. We've been going through the kind of the narrative, and now all of a sudden John inserts some information just to make things clearer. One of the hallmarks of John's gospel is he just jumps in the middle of the story and goes, this is what this means, or here's what you need to know here. Just thought I'd point that out.
It's helpful.
What?
It's helpful.
Verse 14. Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, see, you have been made well. Sin no more, lest the worst thing come upon you. If Jesus had just healed this man and let him go on his way, he really wouldn't have served the man. So Jesus found him to address his truly deepest need. The man had a far greater problem than his infirmities, as do we all. I'm going the long way around, so brace yourselves. Jesus says to him, see, you have been made well. I think this supports the idea that the healings that people thought took place at this pool and lined up for didn't really happen. I think a lot of people got into, oh, hey, pool burped, oh, the angel started, and they get in, and they get out, and, oh, yeah, it's great, and then it's not there. And Jesus points out the fact, see, you have been actually made well. See, you're walking around. This isn't a mental thing. This is, you're actually well. You're walking around in the city. You're carrying your mat. See, you have been made well.
Amen.
Now, Jesus healed this man where a false god had been worshipped, and now, at the very least, old superstitions were being followed. Jesus did what the false god and the superstitions were supposed to do, but couldn't. And this is not the last time we will see Jesus do this. In fact, he makes it a point to go out to places where there's great idolatry and great worship of false gods and a history of it, and do exactly what that God didn't do. And ask for declarations that God demanded and people didn't make. And he does this because this is what God does. The plagues on Egypt, we talked about the Passover. Do you know every one of those plagues was a direct response to a god that the Egyptians worshipped. They worshipped the god of frogs. So God gave them frogs. God gave them a lot of frogs. And when Moses showed up, he threw down the rod and it turned into a snake. And then Pharaoh's magicians showed up and they threw down their rods and it turned into a snake. But it didn't end there. God's snake ate their snakes. God is not afraid to throw it down. In Isaiah, he actually challenges, go get your false god. Come on, let's have a duel. Let's throw it up. Let's see which God can actually do what he says he's going to do. Come on, bring him. I'm good with this. Let's go. Come on. Repeatedly. Yeah, bring your God. Bring your little wood thing, your little silver studded, silver covered, and just set it out in front of me. And, you know, you bake bread with the rest of it, and you warmed your house with the rest of it, and now you're falling down and worshiping to it. Bring that, and let's see who actually can do what they say they can do. God is not afraid to throw down, and Jesus is doing the same thing. In fact, next week when we get into the statements of Jesus, he's going to point out what God's done. He does at the end of this what God does. He's been working. I've been working. One of the things God does is challenge our idols. Now, some claim that this verse implies that the man's infirmity was the result of sin. It's possible to extract that from this, but I tend to disagree with it. The text does not come out and say it, and there's plenty. I just hate going too far beyond what the text actually says, and the text does not give us a reason for why this man was infirm. And there are other points where people outright ask, why is this person dealing with that, and why? And Jesus is more than happy to answer those things. If it's not there, it's not there for a reason. If we were going to read something in it all, it might have been that this man is turned to superstition or the remnants of a false god for healing, and he didn't turn to God for deliverance. That's the most I could possibly extrapolate out of that. But if that were the case, and if he continues on that path, wow, he will face something way worse than 38 years of being lame. He's going to face an eternity of damnation. He's going to face an eternity separated from God. And that's way worse than 38 years of being infirmed. That will make 38 years of being slow and infirmed feel like a day at the beach. Verse 15, the man departed and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. Jesus knew this guy was going to do this. It's not a surprise. Jesus chose this man because he wanted this conversation, although it looks a whole lot more like a confrontation to me with the Jews. Jesus has spent a good deal of time revealing himself to his disciples, and now he's going worldwide. It's not going to be a secret anymore. He's not afraid. He never was afraid, but he's not holding back anymore. The groundwork has been laid, and Jesus is ready to take on the establishment. He's ready to take on the Jews. And he does. And I'm just going to lightly pass over these because next week we'll hit them hard as part of Jesus' statements. For this reason, the Jews persecuted Jesus and sought to kill him because he had done these things on the Sabbath. Gloves are coming off. They're already talking about killing him. And at this point, Jesus could have really changed tactics. He could have argued that could have just argued the law. Hey, these are your rules and not God's rules. God said you can do this and not do that. He could have argued points of the law. He could have gone a whole lot of other ways to kind of de-escalate the situation, if you will. But he doesn't. In fact, he takes a great big fat 5-gallon bucket of gasoline and throws it on the fire. But Jesus answered them, "My Father has been working until now, and I have been working." Therefore, the Jews sought all the more to kill him, because he not only broke the Sabbath, but he also said that God was his Father, making himself equal with God. Jesus could have done so many things to de-escalate the situation, and he actually just ratchets it up. This is a conversation or a confrontation he wants to have. Jesus is moving at an ever greater rate of speed towards the cross. To kind of wrap everything up, there was something else about that pool of Bethesda. This had been a site of idol worship, right? This had been a site where, at the very least, it continued that people were following superstitions and looking for healings from things that couldn't provide. And there's a lot of people that would say that we should have nothing to do with that that's inherently evil and inherently bad. We're coming up on the holidays, and I don't think it's any secret to anybody that the Catholic Church, in its early years, when they went into an area, they would look at the festivals and holidays that they would have, and they would Christianize it. And actually, Christmas was a day that they celebrated in the Babylonian mystery religion, one of their gods' births or deaths. But Jesus was doing more than healing that man there. Jesus was redeeming that place too. Do you know, it wasn't the devil's place. It wasn't that false god's place. God made it. God created it. If anything, Jesus was taking the place back too. It belonged to him. Jesus came back to get us. He created us. We were his. And he's redeeming. Jesus can redeem days. That wasn't the Babylonian mystery God's day. It was God's day. He made it. It was always God's day. And we can take it back. God can redeem days. God can redeem places. If we choose to make it a celebration, that's what it should have been all along. So Jesus was redeeming that place as well. And he did, because now, today, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Christians every year go to that place. And they see where Jesus walked and where Jesus did this incredible miracle. Jesus redeemed that place, just like he wants to redeem us.
Amen.
Just like he paid the price so that each and every one of us can be made new, can be made the way he wanted us to be, so that we can be a shining example of what he can do and how he can take the unholy and the unclean and the ugly and the ungodly and make them just like him. So there's a whole lot of things going on here. And next week we're going to see the confrontation or the conversation that Jesus has just set up. And pray for me, because every single verse in there, at least every 2 or 3 verses, could be a sermon all by itself. So doing all that's going to be quite a feat.